If you don't remember this conversation tomorrow, run. The man on the hospital bed gripped my wrist with surprising strength. His eyes were wide, frantic, filled with something close to terror. His fingers dug into my skin as if he were trying to anchor himself to reality. They took my memories. I think they'll take yours too. My stomach twisted. Who will? His breathing turned ragged. His face was pale, drenched in sweat, as though he had just run for his life. I had seen fear before, but this was something else. This was pure panic. "You don't get it," he whispered, glancing at the door as if expecting someone to burst through. "I don't know my name. I woke up and they told me I'm Adam Carter, but I know that's not right. I feel it." A cold chill spread through my chest. "What are you saying?" He swallowed hard. "I signed up for the trial. They said it would help with trauma. They lied." His grip tightened. "You need to leave before they erase you too." The heart monitor beside him beat erratically. He sucked in a sharp breath, his entire body going rigid. "Listen to me," he began, but then his eyes rolled back. His fingers convulsed around my wrist before going limp. The monitor let out a shrill, unbroken tone. "Flatline." Nurses rushed in, shouting for a crash cart. One shoved me aside as they worked to revive him. I backed away, heart pounding. I needed to leave, now. But before I could move, a voice spoke behind me. "Mr. Carter, it's time for your procedure." I turned slowly. Dr. Mercer stood there, calm, composed. His piercing blue eyes held no warmth. "Right this way," he said, smiling. But all I could hear was the dead man's final warning. "If you don't remember this conversation tomorrow, run." The hallway smelled of antiseptic and something colder, something metallic. I followed Dr. Mercer in silence, my pulse hammering in my ears. "This will be a simple procedure," he said without looking back. "Nothing to worry about. Nothing to worry about." The words rang hollow after what I had just seen. The man in the hospital bed, Adam Carter, or whoever he had been, was dead. And his last words clung to me like a stain I couldn't scrub away. "They took my memories. I think they'll take yours too." I needed to get out. But how? "You're unusually quiet," Dr. Mercer observed, pushing open a door at the end of the hallway. "Any concerns?" I forced a weak smile. "Just trying to stay calm." He nodded as if he had heard it all before. Perfectly natural. The room was small, windowless. In the center stood a reclined medical chair with thick leather straps on the armrests. A tray of instruments sat beside it, gleaming under the fluorescent light. A nurse waited inside, her expression unreadable. "Please have a seat," Dr. Mercer said, gesturing to the chair. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to turn around, to leave and never look back, but I forced myself to step forward. If I hesitated now, they would know something was wrong. I lowered myself onto the chair, feeling the cold surface beneath me. The leather straps were unbuckled, but their presence alone made my skin crawl. "We'll start with a mild sedative," Dr. Mercer said, reaching for a syringe. The needle glinted as he prepared it. "It helps with relaxation, nothing more." The nurse stepped closer, rolling up my sleeve. Her fingers were ice cold. "You don't have to do this." The words were so soft, I almost didn't hear them. I glanced up. Her face was carefully neutral, but something flickered in her eyes, something urgent. "What?" I whispered. Dr. Mercer turned, frowning. "Did you say something?" The nurse's grip on my arm tightened for the briefest moment, then she let go. "No, doctor." I barely breathed as the syringe neared my skin. "This will be painless," Dr. Mercer assured me. Just like he had assured Adam Carter. I had seconds to decide. Let them inject me and hope I woke up still knowing who I was, or run. The needle touched my skin. I made my choice. I moved before I could think. My arm jerked away just as the needle touched my skin. The nurse gasped. The syringe clattered onto the tray. "What are you doing?" Dr. Mercer's voice was sharp, controlled, but I caught a flicker of something else. Annoyance? Concern? I forced a shaky laugh, gripping my arm like I'd been startled by accident. "Sorry, just a reflex. I hate needles." The nurse stared at me, her face unreadable. Dr. Mercer studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Understandable. We can try again." He reached for another syringe. "No, I couldn't let them do this. Actually, I said, forcing my voice to stay light, I think I need a moment. Maybe some water. The nurse hesitated, glancing at Dr. Mercer. He sighed. Of course, we'll give you. A sharp beeping sound pulled me from the darkness. My eyelids felt heavy, my limbs sluggish. The world around me was blurred, shifting in and out of focus like a half-formed dream. I was lying in a hospital bed, white sheets, pale walls, an Eve line snaking into my arm. Where was I? My head throbbed as I tried to sit up. A dull, aching pressure pressed against my skull, like something had been taken out, leaving behind an empty space. The beeping quickened. The door swung open. Good morning, Mr. Carter. Dr. Mercer stood in the doorway, hands folded neatly in front of him, smiling. Something about the way he said the name made my stomach twist. How do you feel? I swallowed, my throat dry. Fine, I think. Excellent, he said, stepping closer. The procedure was a success. The procedure. Flashes of memory hit me. A needle. My own racing heartbeat. The moment the world slipped away. What exactly did you do? I asked. My voice felt foreign, like it belonged to someone else. Dr. Mercer tilted his head slightly, studying me. You volunteered for the trial, remember? The words made my pulse stutter. Of course, I said quickly. But I didn't remember signing up. I didn't remember anything before waking up in this bed. Dr. Mercer's smile remained. That's normal. Some temporary disorientation is expected. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small notepad. Let's do a quick check. Can you tell me your full name? My name. The answer should have been immediate, instinctual. But when I opened my mouth, nothing came. The silence stretched. Take your time, Dr. Mercer said gently. Panic clawed at my chest. I forced my brain to work, to pull something, anything, out of the void where my past should have been. I'm Adam Carter. The name felt wrong, like a shirt that didn't quite fit. But Dr. Mercer nodded approvingly. Good. And do you remember why you're here? I hesitated. There was only one answer that seemed safe. For the trial, I said carefully. Very good. His smile widened, but his eyes remained cold. You'll need rest, he continued. We'll do more evaluation soon. For now, just relax. He turned to leave. Wait. The words slipped out before I could stop it. He paused. There was someone else, I said, gripping the sheets, another patient, before my procedure. Dr. Mercer's expression didn't change. There are many patients here, Mr. Carter. No, I said. He warned me about losing my memory. Dr. Mercer studied me for a long moment. Then he smiled. There was no other patient, Mr. Carter. He walked out, closing the door behind him. The lock clicked into place. I sat motionless in the hospital bed, staring at the door that had just locked behind Dr. Mercer. There was no other patient, Mr. Carter. The words echoed in my mind, hollow and certain. But I knew what I had seen. I remembered the man gripping my wrist, his terrified eyes, his final warning. Except, did I remember? The memory felt distant now, like something half forgotten from childhood. The more I tried to focus on his face, the blurrier it became. Panic crawled up my spine. I needed to ground myself. I turned to the bedside table where my personal belongings had been placed, my phone. I grabbed it, my hands trembling as I pressed the power button. The screen lit up, and my heart nearly stopped. The date. 3 days had passed since my procedure. 3 entire days, gone. I checked my call log. Empty. My messages? Blank. There was nothing. No record that I had ever contacted anyone, that anyone had reached out to me. Like I had been erased. The beeping of the heart monitor quickened, matching the erratic beat of my pulse. I forced myself to breathe. Slow, steady, think. I scrolled through my phone, searching for something familiar, contacts, notes, anything that could tell me who I really was. But every name in my contacts looked foreign. I tapped on one at random. Mom. My fingers hovered over the call button. What if she didn't pick up? Or worse, what if she did, and I didn't recognize her voice? I swallowed hard and pressed the call button. The line rang once, twice. Then, The number you are trying to reach is not in service. I pulled the phone away, my breath catching. I tried another number. Same result. Another. Disconnected. I checked my photos. Dozens of images, but none sparked recognition. Blurry shots of city streets, unfamiliar faces, places that meant nothing to me. Who had taken these pictures? Was it me? I set the phone down, my hands shaking. Don't let them put you under. The nurse's warning flashed in my mind. Had she known this would happen, had she tried to stop me? A knock at the door made me jump. Mr. Carter. A voice, calm, professional. Time for your evaluation. I looked at the locked door, my phone still clutched in my hand. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what had been done to me. But one thing was becoming very, very clear. I wasn't a patient. I was a prisoner. I didn't answer the knock. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then the voice came again, calm but firmer. Mr. Carter, we need to check your progress. My grip tightened around the phone. I couldn't trust them. Not Dr. Mercer, not whoever was outside that door. But what choice did I have? I took a slow breath. Think. There had to be a way out. The room was small, just the hospital bed, the bedside table, and a chair. No windows. No vents big enough to crawl through. The door handle rattled. I'm coming in. I shoved the phone under my pillow just as the lock clicked and the door swung open. A woman in a lab coat stepped inside. Not Dr. Mercer, someone new. Good morning, Mr. Carter. I'm Dr. Ellis. I'll be handling your evaluation today. She smiled, but there was something off about it. Too polished, too rehearsed. I forced myself to sit up, ignoring the lingering fog in my mind. Sure, I said. What do you need to evaluate? Dr. Ellis walked over to the bedside table and picked up a clipboard. Just a few simple memory tests. I swallowed hard. Can you tell me today's date? She asked. April 2nd. Her smile didn't waver. Close. I clenched my fists under the blanket. Do you remember where you were before coming here? I opened my mouth, then stopped. The answer should have been easy. My home, my workplace, the last thing I had done before signing up for the trial. But my mind was blank. I forced myself to think harder, to push past the fog. A flash of something, a city street. Neon lights reflected in a puddle, voices murmuring around me. I gripped my temples. I was outside. Dr. Ellis nodded like she had expected that response. Do you remember your job? I tried again, another flash. An office? A desk covered in papers? But then it was gone, slipping away like water through my fingers. I don't know, I admitted, my pulse quickening. That's okay, Dr. Ellis said. Your memories may take time to resurface. But what if they didn't? What if they had been erased completely? She scribbled something on her clipboard that met my eyes. One last question, Mr. Carter. She leaned in slightly, voice softer. Before the procedure, do you remember speaking to another patient? My breath caught. No, I lied. Her expression didn't change. Good. She stood, setting the clipboard down. We'll check in again soon. As she walked to the door, I forced myself to stay calm. But inside, I was screaming. They knew. The door closed behind Dr. Ellis with a soft click. I didn't move. I barely breathed. Before the procedure, do you remember speaking to another patient? She had been testing me, watching for hesitation, for a slip. I had lied. But had she believed me? My fingers curled into the blanket. I needed to get out of here. I reached under the pillow, feeling for my phone. The smooth surface was reassuring, real. I turned it on, my eyes flicking to the battery, 15%. Not much time. I went to my notes app, hoping I had left something, anything, that could tell me who I was before all this. There was only one entry. It was a single line. If you're reading this, they got to you. My blood ran cold. I hadn't written that, not that I remembered, but maybe I had before the procedure, before they erased me. I scrolled down, nothing else. My hands shook as I tapped out a new message. Who am I? It felt ridiculous, but I had to start somewhere. Then I heard it, a faint, rhythmic beeping. Not the heart monitor, something else. I turned my head slowly. The bedside table. My eyes locked onto a small black device, almost hidden behind the lamp. A recorder. They were listening. My throat tightened. I forced myself to breathe normally, to move naturally. I set the phone down and leaned back against the pillows, closing my eyes. But inside, my mind was racing. They knew I had been asking questions. They knew I had lied about the other patient. And now they knew I had found the note. I needed to act fast. Keeping my movements slow, careful, I reached toward the recorder and slid it into my palm. If they were listening, I had to give them what they expected. "I think I'm feeling better," I said aloud, as if speaking to myself. Maybe they were right. Maybe I just need rest. I yawned, rolling onto my side, tucking the recorder beneath the blanket. Then I waited. 5 minutes, 10. The door didn't open. No footsteps in the hall. They weren't coming. Not yet. I let out a shaky breath, gripping the recorder. I pressed play. Static. Then, if you're hearing this, they didn't erase everything. My own voice. My chest tightened. "They're lying to you. You were never supposed to be here." A pause. A sharp breath. "Don't trust anyone. Not Dr. Mercer. Not the nurses. Not even yourself." A click. Then silence. I stared at the recorder, my heart pounding. My past self had left me a warning, but it wasn't enough. I needed to know the truth. Before they took it from me again, I played the recording again. "Don't trust anyone. Not Dr. Mercer. Not the nurses. Not even yourself." My own voice warning me. But why? What had I discovered before the procedure? I stared at the recorder, gripping it so tightly my knuckles turned white. I needed to remember. I closed my eyes and forced my mind back, past the hospital bed, past Dr. Mercer's calm smile, past the fog clouding my thoughts. A flash. Rain hitting pavement, headlights cutting through the dark. A name. Not Adam Carter. Something else. I grabbed my phone and pulled up the Notes app again. Who am I? This time, I added another line. What was my real name? The moment I typed it, something shifted inside me. A pressure, like my mind was fighting to keep something buried. If I could just push a little harder, the door handle rattled. I barely had time to shove the recorder back under the blanket before the door swung open. Dr. Mercer. His eyes swept the room, too quick, too practiced, searching. "How are we feeling today, Mr. Carter?" I forced a weak smile. "Better, I think." "Good to hear." He stepped closer, watching me the way a scientist watches an experiment. "We've scheduled another session for you this afternoon. Nothing major, just some light cognitive testing." My stomach twisted. "More tests?" "Just to make sure everything is progressing as expected." Progressing. Like I was some kind of project. "I actually had a question," I said, keeping my tone casual. Dr. Mercer raised an eyebrow. "Of course. Why did I sign up for this trial?" His expression didn't change. "We discussed this before your procedure. You volunteered." "Right. But why?" "You were struggling with severe memory loss. You came to us for help." The words were smooth, practiced, but they didn't feel right. "What kind of memory loss?" I pressed. "Long term," he said without hesitation. "You had already started losing important details about your life, your job, your family. You knew it was only getting worse." I searched his face for any sign of a lie. "And what was my job?" "We can discuss that in today's session." Too easy, too controlled. He was keeping something from me. "One last thing," I said. "Before the procedure, did I tell you my real name?" Dr. Mercer's smile didn't falter, but his fingers twitched. A tiny, almost imperceptible movement. "Your name is Adam Carter," he said smoothly. But now I knew. He was lying. Dr. Mercer's smile lingered in the air long after he'd spoken. Adam Carter. The name hung there, unnatural. "Your name is Adam Carter," he'd said, but the certainty in his voice only deepened the pit in my stomach. Something about the way he said it, calm, matter of fact, made it feel like a command, like he was trying to force the name into my mind, shape it into something real. But it wasn't real. I could feel it. I wasn't Adam Carter. Not anymore. But then who was I? My pulse thudded in my ears as I watched Dr. Mercer, still standing by the door, waiting for me to react, waiting for me to accept his answer. "Are you ready for your session?" he asked, voice smooth, like we were having a normal conversation. Session. It felt like a trap, a tightening noose. I shook my head, my throat dry. I need to ask something else. Dr. Mercer didn't flinch. Of course. Before the trial, who was I? Really? He hesitated this time. Just a brief flicker of uncertainty behind his eyes. It was enough. "You were a man struggling with memory loss," he said again, his tone never wavering. "That's why you came here, to fix it." The words were rehearsed, too rehearsed. Why was he lying? "I don't believe you," I said before I could stop myself. His eyes narrowed. There was a sudden, sharp tension in the air. "You're confused, Mr. Carter. The procedure has altered your memory, but it will all come back." "Will it?" I wanted to scream, to demand the truth, but my voice caught in my throat. The room was closing in on me. "I need answers," I whispered. "Real answers." Dr. Mercer stared at me for a long time, then turned slowly, reaching for the door. "We'll continue the session later," he said, the door creaking open. "Rest for now." I watched him leave, but I didn't move. The door clicked shut. I was alone. My heart raced, but I couldn't sit still. I had to know. I had to find out what had happened to me before they took everything away. I grabbed the recorder again, my hands trembling. "If you're reading this, they got to you." My own voice from the past, the warning. But what did it mean? What had I done before this trial? There were no answers, not yet. But there had to be something else. I had to keep looking. With the recorder in hand, I moved toward the drawer beside the bed. I tapped it open slowly, expecting to find more medical forms, more lies. Instead, a small, yellowed envelope sat inside. I pulled it out, my fingers shaking. My name was written on it, in scrawled, uneven handwriting. I tore it open, heart pounding. Inside, there was a single photograph. And in the corner, beneath a face I almost recognized, were the words, "Don't trust them. They erased you." The photograph slipped from my fingers, falling to the floor with a soft thud. I stared at it, my heart racing, my mind struggling to process the image. It was me. At least it looked like me. The face was unfamiliar but hauntingly close, as if it was a version of me I should recognize but didn't. The photograph was old, grainy, with edges frayed from time. The background was blurred, but the more I stared at the face, the more something deep inside me told me this was the truth. Something real, something I had lost. "Don't trust them. They've erased you." The words scrawled on the back of the photo echoed in my mind. Erased. But erased from what? Who had taken this photo? Why was it left for me to find? I bent down slowly and picked it up, my hands shaking. The picture held no answers, just more questions. The door creaked open. I snapped to attention, my breath catching in my throat. Dr. Mercer stepped inside again, his eyes cold and unreadable. "We need to continue your evaluation," he said, as if nothing was wrong. His voice was smooth, like a surgeon's scalpel. I quickly shoved the photo back into the envelope and stuffed it under my pillow. "Evaluation," I repeated, trying to keep my voice steady. "Yes," he replied, stepping further into the room. "It's important we track your progress." I didn't want to play along. I wanted to demand the truth, to tear through the lies he'd been feeding me. But something about the way he was standing, something in his eyes, told me that pushing him too hard now could make me disappear completely. "I'm not sure I remember everything," I said, looking down at my hands. "I'm struggling." I watched for his reaction, a flicker, a crack in the mask he wore. Nothing. "That's understandable," Dr. Mercer said, nodding. "The procedure is designed to clear away distractions, to give you a fresh start. But it may take time for you to adjust." A fresh start. Was that what this was? A reset? What exactly was erased? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Mercer paused. "Your memories of the past year," he said. "The trial participants often experience similar lapses in their short-term recall. But don't worry, it will come back." There it was again, the same words, the same rehearsed lie. I couldn't believe him. But what if it doesn't come back? I pressed. What if everything is gone for good? He studied me for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he smiled, that same too perfect smile. You're worrying unnecessarily, Mr. Carter, he said, his tone warm. This is part of the process. Trust me. Trust him. I swallowed hard, holding back the words that threatened to spill out. Instead, I nodded. Right, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I'll trust you. But I didn't, and I never would again. The next few hours blurred together. Dr. Mercer left, his calm smile still lingering in the back of my mind, and the room became a cage again. The air felt thick, pressing in from every side. The photo under my pillow burned against my skin, like it was waiting to be discovered. I couldn't ignore it any longer. I pulled it out, my hands shaking. The face staring back at me was mine, but not mine. Something in those eyes, something in the posture, made it feel like it was a past version of me, a stranger wearing my skin. The message was clear, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to explain why I had been erased. Don't trust them. They've erased you. But erased from what? Erased from who? My thoughts swirled, and I felt like I was suffocating in a haze of confusion and fear. There had to be a reason I was here, a reason I had been chosen for this trial. But the answers were slipping further away with every passing minute. A soft knock on the door interrupted my spiraling thoughts. Mr. Carter? Dr. Mercer's voice. My heart skipped. I shoved the photo back into the envelope and tossed it back under the pillow, just as the door creaked open. It's time for your session, he said smoothly, stepping inside. His gaze flicked briefly to the bed to me, then back to his clipboard. He didn't notice anything. I had been careful, almost too careful. I'm not sure I'm ready, I said, pushing myself to sit up, forcing a small, uncertain smile. Dr. Mercer didn't respond right away. He just nodded, his eyes scanning me, calculating. Then, without another word, he moved toward the chair beside my bed. This is important, Mr. Carter, he said, as though he was speaking to a child. We need to track your cognitive progress. I stiffened. The word track had an edge to it, like I was something being studied under a microscope. I understand, I replied, swallowing the knot in my throat. He set down his clipboard and turned to face me, looking me straight in the eyes. Let's begin with a few questions. The tension in the room thickened. I forced myself to stay still, not letting the fear show on my face. What's your full name, Mr. Carter? It was a simple question, one I should have answered without thinking, but my mind was a storm, a maze of tangled threads. Adam Carter, I said, my voice tight. He nodded, but there was something in his eyes, a hint of doubt. Correct. Then, without warning, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small device, a handheld scanner. I need to check something, he said, holding it out toward me. My heart slammed against my ribs. What is that? Just a routine procedure, he answered smoothly, but there was an edge in his voice now. I didn't move. I couldn't move. He reached closer, the scanner humming softly. Just hold still, he ordered, and his gaze locked onto mine with an intensity that made me want to look away. But I couldn't. As the scanner hovered near my skin, I felt a coldness creep up my spine. What was he really checking? What was he looking for? And then, just as quickly, the device beeped and he pulled it away. All clear, he said. We're making progress. But the words didn't feel reassuring. The cracks in his smile widened, and for the first time, I realized he wasn't just monitoring my memories. He was controlling them. The scanner beeped again, its stereo sound cutting through the heavy silence between us. Dr. Mercer's eyes flicked to the device, a flicker of satisfaction passing over his face, though it didn't reach his cold, calculating gaze. All clear, he repeated, his voice clipped. But the words felt hollow, empty. I wanted to ask him, all clear from what? But my tongue felt thick, my throat dry. There was something wrong with all of this, something I couldn't put my finger on. I watched him carefully, trying to read his every movement. He was hiding something, and whatever it was, I was getting closer to uncovering it. What exactly does that scanner do? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Dr. Mercer's eyes narrowed, just a fraction before he replied. It monitors your cognitive function. checks for any inconsistencies. Inconsistencies? He didn't flinch. Yes, Mr. Carter. It ensures your memories are stable, intact. Stable, intact. The words bounced around in my mind like hollow echoes. And if they're not, I pressed, trying to keep my voice steady despite the tightening in my chest. Dr. Mercer didn't answer immediately. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, considering. Then we would adjust accordingly. Ensure no memory loss, no lapses. Adjust? The word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Adjust could be anything. It could mean erasing more of me. Is that what you're doing? I asked, my voice trembling slightly despite myself. Are you adjusting my memories? There was a brief silence. Then, as though the question wasn't important, he smiled again. That same practiced, perfect smile. You're overthinking things, Mr. Carter. We're here to help you. Help. The word tasted like ash on my tongue. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized Dr. Mercer wasn't just a doctor. He was a gatekeeper, a controller. He wasn't here to heal me. He was here to maintain the lie. How long have I been here? I asked, my voice colder now, more sure of itself. He didn't even flinch at the question. You've been with us for 3 weeks, Mr. Carter. Your treatment has been progressing well. 3 weeks. I couldn't remember any of it. The days blurred together in a fog of confusion, each one slipping further out of my grasp. Something had happened during those weeks, something that had shaped me into who I was now or who they wanted me to be. I want to leave, I said suddenly, the words coming out before I could stop them. Dr. Mercer's eyes flicked to mine, and for a moment, something flickered behind his mask of calm. Was it fear? Was it anger? But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. You can't leave, Mr. Carter, he said quietly. Not yet. Not until we're certain you're complete. Complete. The words sent a cold shiver down my spine. I knew it wasn't just about memories anymore. They were shaping me into something, someone. And if I wasn't careful, I'd disappear completely. The words echoed in my mind. Not yet. Not until we're certain you're complete. Complete. It was a word that made my skin crawl. Complete meant whole, but I wasn't whole. Not anymore. I was a broken puzzle, with pieces scattered and lost. I want to know the truth, I said, the words sharper now, more demanding. Dr. Mercer's gaze flicked to me, cool as ever, but something behind his eyes shifted. You are asking questions you're not ready for, Mr. Carter. I think I've been ready for a long time, I replied, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. I need to know what's happening here. He stepped closer, his movements slow and deliberate. You need to trust us, Mr. Carter. We are helping you. We are fixing what's broken. Fixing what's broken. Was that what they were doing? Was this a fix or a trap? You haven't answered my question, I pressed, not letting him sidestep me again. How long have I been here? 3 weeks. He smiled, that smile that never reached his eyes. Yes, 3 weeks. It's not much time in the grand scheme of things. 3 weeks. I struggled to make sense of it all. In those 3 weeks, I had lost myself. Or had they taken me away? Removed something vital, something irreplaceable? What was erased? I demanded. Why can't I remember anything? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at me like he was evaluating me, calculating how much I could take. We've discussed this before, he said finally. You were struggling with memory loss, severe memory impairment. The procedure was to help you. Severe memory impairment, a lie, a carefully constructed lie. You're lying, I said, my voice low but sharp. This wasn't about fixing me. This was about erasing me, about erasing my past. His expression darkened just slightly, but enough for me to catch it. You don't understand, Mr. Carter. That make me understand, I spat, frustration seeping into my words. Tell me what happened to me before this. What did I lose? Dr. Mercer's eyes flickered to the door, as if considering something. For a moment, I thought he might leave. But then, in a move so swift, it almost caught me off guard, he leaned in close. You think you lost something, he whispered. But what if the truth is worse than you can imagine? My heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? I asked. voice barely a breath. He leaned back, his eyes dark, almost like he was seeing right through me. "You weren't supposed to remember, Mr. Carter. None of you were. We erased it all for a reason, and it's better that way." I felt the ground beneath me shift, the room suddenly smaller, tighter. "A reason?" I asked, my voice trembling despite myself. "What reason? What did you take from me?" Dr. Mercer's gaze grew colder. "You'll find out soon enough, but you may not like the truth when it comes." The door opened behind him and he turned, glancing over his shoulder. "Time's up for today," he said, his voice carrying that same chilling calm. "We'll continue this another time, Mr. Carter." He left without another word, the door clicking shut behind him. I was alone again, but I wasn't helpless. The truth was out there, and no matter what it took, I was going to find it. The silence of the room felt oppressive, like it was pressing in from all sides. I sat there, heart pounding, trying to process the bombshell Dr. Mercer had just dropped. "It's better that way," he had said. What had he meant? What had I lost? I stared at the empty chair across from me, imagining him sitting there, smiling that cold, calculating smile. His words, cryptic and unsettling, looped in my mind like an echo. "You weren't supposed to remember." I wasn't supposed to remember. The weight of that hit me like a ton of bricks. If I wasn't supposed to remember, then what had I been before this place? Who had I been? A knock at the door shattered the silence. My pulse spiked. "Mr. Carter." The voice on the other side was familiar, too familiar. Dr. Mercer again. He must have sensed my unease because the door opened almost immediately, as if he'd been waiting for me to let my guard down. "I thought we were finished for the day," I said, trying to sound calm, even though my heart was thudding painfully in my chest. Dr. Mercer's gaze swept over the room, pausing just long enough to assess the subtle tension in my body. "We are finished," he replied. "I just thought you might appreciate something new." He stepped aside, and a nurse appeared behind him, holding a small device in her hands. I tensed immediately, a sense of dread creeping up my spine. "This is a new kind of test," Dr. Mercer continued, his voice too smooth. "It's nothing to worry about, just a simple procedure to help us track your neural responses." I didn't trust him, not after everything, not after the things he had already done. "I'm not sure I'm ready for any more tests," I said, my voice tight. Dr. Mercer's expression remained unreadable. "It's perfectly safe, Mr. Carter. We wouldn't ask you to do anything dangerous." "I don't believe you." The words slipped out before I could stop them. For the first time, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, perhaps irritation, perhaps something darker. "You're becoming paranoid," he said, almost too gently. "Paranoia is a symptom of the treatment, but we can help you with that too." I wasn't sure if he was threatening me or trying to comfort me, but either way, I wasn't buying it. "I'll pass on the test," I said firmly. "I'd had enough of your tests." He studied me for a long moment, his eyes sharp, calculating. Finally, he sighed and gestured for the nurse to leave. "Very well," he said. "But remember, Mr. Carter, you're here for your own good. We're trying to help you. We only want what's best for you." He turned to leave, but then paused. "We'll see how long that lasts," he muttered under his breath, so quietly I almost didn't catch it. Something shifted in the air. It wasn't just the words, it was his tone. It was off. There was something else, something he wasn't saying. I stood up abruptly, my mind racing. "What did you mean by that?" Dr. Mercer glanced back at me, his cold smile returning. "You'll see soon enough, Mr. Carter." The door clicked shut behind him, leaving me alone once again. But this time, I wasn't just confused. I was determined. Whatever was hidden here, whatever truth they were keeping from me, I was going to find it. And I was going to find it soon. The days that followed were a blur, each one bleeding into the next. I couldn't shake the feeling that Dr. Mercer was watching me, waiting for me to slip up. Every interaction, every word, felt calculated. But I had learned enough by now. I knew they were hiding something, and I wasn't going to wait around to figure out what it was. I began to watch them just as closely as they watched me. Every time someone came into my room, whether it was Dr. Mercer or one of the nurses, they seemed to be studying me, reading my every reaction. But that was the problem. They were always one step ahead. It was during one of these moments, as I lay awake in my bed staring at the ceiling, that I noticed something strange. The wall across from me had a small, barely noticeable crack running along the paint. It wasn't much, but it was enough. I could feel it in my gut, the tension, the weight of something waiting to be uncovered. I got out of bed slowly, careful not to make a sound, and moved toward the crack in the wall. As I leaned closer, I realized the crack wasn't just a defect in the paint. It was the edge of a hidden panel. I traced my fingers along it, my heart pounding in my chest. With a quiet creak, the panel shifted. The air in the room seemed to still, as if time itself was holding its breath. I pushed it open, revealing a small, dusty compartment behind the wall. Inside, there was a folder, a thick manila folder, its edges worn from years of being hidden away. I pulled it out with trembling hands. The folder was labeled with a name, Adam Carter. My name. My pulse quickened. I opened it cautiously, the paper inside feeling heavier than it should have. The first document I pulled out was a series of photographs, photos of me, but they weren't the ones I recognized. These were old, faded images, each one more unsettling than the last. In the photos, I was different. Younger, yes, but there was something else. I couldn't place it, not at first, until I saw the scars. Deep, jagged scars running across my arms, my neck. Scars that were nowhere to be found on my body now. The next few pages were medical reports. The words blurred together in a mix of jargon I didn't understand, but there were a few things that stood out. Subject shows signs of extreme neural degradation, memory loss progressing at an alarming rate. Subject has shown resistance to memory erasure protocol. The reports didn't stop there. They described procedures I had never been told about. Memory wipes, 4th session complete. Memories erased, significant portions of childhood and early adulthood. It was like a knife to the chest. They had erased me, again and again. And then, at the very end of the folder, there was a final page. A name, a date, and a simple statement. Final subject status, incomplete. Incomplete. The word rang in my ears, a final hammer blow to the shattered remnants of my mind. They hadn't just erased me, they had replaced me. And the person I had been, it was gone. But what they hadn't counted on was this. No matter how many times they tried to erase me, I would always find a way to break through. I was no longer just a patient, I was a weapon, and I was coming for the truth.